All right, well, let me start and then people who join in the middle, I can catch them up to speed. So a couple of things before we start with the lesson for today. Today we have Act 3, the final act of the importance of being earnest. Also, I want to talk about essay number 2. I introduced that 2 weeks ago, so kind of want to talk about that, see how it's coming. And I also want to talk a little bit about the final exam today. I was looking at the schedule and I realized that the only thing that we had on for tomorrow, because tomorrow's a B day, is to talk about essay 2 and the final exam and any questions that you might have. And so I realized that if I talk about those two things today, then we do not need to meet on Zoom tomorrow. So officially, no Zoom class tomorrow. You can have your Friday to work on things. Maybe you want to work on the essay, or we also have a discussion that's due tomorrow. The post for number 8, romanticism, is due tomorrow. So that one, you can maybe use a little extra time to get those things done or what have you. I do want you to do a formative tomorrow. I'll send out a notification on Google Classroom so that even the people who aren't here today are informed, but I do want you to fill out a formative tomorrow, just about how it's coming with your paper so that I can give you an opportunity to get some help if you need it. The paper, essay number 2, is due in a week and a half. So hopefully you've already started looking at the topics and that sort of thing. We're gonna get into it a little bit today, but tomorrow the formative asks you a few questions about where you are. And if you haven't started, maybe tomorrow is a good day to answer the formatives and kind of like choose a direction that's going to guide you toward doing that. Another announcement that I have before I get started is course evaluations. Do make sure, I think only one person has done their evaluations. I don't have access to who has done them. I only know how many people in a class have completed them. They're open until May 6th. So do take the time to go and do your course evaluations. I read them, I take them to heart. I know that the department chairs look at them to make sure that, they still have quality instructors out there. And so, if you have a chance, you don't have to go into detail, but it is good to participate in that course evaluation process. You can just click right here on course evaluation and it will take you to that. All right, we're going to watch Act 3, but that will be like our last thing for today before we sign off. I wanted to talk a little bit about the final exam and essay number 2, just so that we're all on the same page, because we have the rest of this week and then 2 more weeks, and that's pretty much it. Final exam is a window. It's set up just like the midterm. So there's a window of time in which you need to complete your final exam. And then my grades are due on the 17th. So the paper is coming up in a week and a half. That one's due. And we'll be finishing off with our final unit, which is 20th century literature. And that's pretty much it. So we're coming up pretty closely to the end of things. So probably on Tuesday, the 27th, I'll have your study guide ready for the final exam. So that will be about 2 weeks before you actually take the final exam. And that way you can start looking through the concepts and things that will be present on the exam. The final exam is set up just like the midterm. The final exam has a series of short answer questions where you have a random concept from the second half of the term where you have to, talk about what that is, what literature it relates to, and so on. And then some longer questions where you need to do more of, a 10 sentence or so response. I want to make an observation just because I think it might help you for the final about the exams in this course. I noticed that on the midterm, some people were logged in for like super duper lengths of time on the midterm because it will tell me how long you were in the interface for the test. and it was unlimited, so you could have taken as much time during that window as you wanted to. But I got a little worried when I started to see like 7 hours or 10 hours that people were working on the exam. That shouldn't be happening. If you are taking that long on your exam, I'm thinking that like it's supposed to all come from here, right? Like you're just supposed to know the majority of the things that are on the test and be able to write about them. So if you're in a situation where a concept comes up and that doesn't seem familiar to you, so you have to go back to your notes or you have to go research or you have to go figure it out in order to answer the question. If that happens more than once or twice on the midterm, then you're not doing it right. The whole point is that we're learning through the term, and then the exam is you're like proving that you've learned that material. It's not the time that you go and learn that material. So, you know, I I feel bad in some ways that people were taking so long on their exams, but then I think, well, is it because you didn't read the material or that you didn't study the study guide ahead of time to make sure that you were prepared for the exam? So I think if you end up taking a long time on the exam, it's just because you didn't do this. Now you have to do the studying that you were supposed to be doing all along. So I just want to point that out. And when you get the study guide on Tuesday, maybe spend a little time going through and figuring out which terms, because I'm going to put all the terms that could possibly show up on the final on there. And then that way, if you look at it ahead of time and kind of like look through it and say, oh, well, that one I know I could write 5 sentences on that. This one, I don't know, maybe that was in a period where I didn't show up or I didn't read that or whatever, then you could prepare ahead of time for the exam. That's the goal. So, whatever happens in the end result, but I think it's more prudent to use the study guide for that purpose. So I'll have that available to you probably before Tuesday, but Tuesday for sure. And then that way you've got it for 2 weeks before you actually take the final. The other thing I wanted to talk about today is essay number 2. You should be underway with essay number 2. I recognize that some people are procrastinators or some people have other things that are taking priority right now, and that's fine. But the sooner you start with your research paper, likely if there are any issues, the better I can help you. So, sometimes if you start ahead of time and at least know which of the 3 options you want to do and what the focus of your paper is, then it's easier to jump in and work on your research. It takes a while to find your articles. For this particular paper, you need at least 5 sources, and 3 of them need to be from JSTOR. So, if you're unfamiliar with JSTOR, you need some time to figure out how the search functions in there. What if you start researching your topic and you find out that there aren't many articles and you can't even find 3 articles from JSTOR? If you're doing that this next week, then you can email me and say, I'm having trouble finding sources, and I will email you some links or some DOIs or some names of articles that you should be able to find that will help you. So if you have 5 sources, but 3 of them are not from JSTOR, that's going to be a reduction on your overall grade on the paper. So I want to make sure that you have enough time to get all the sources that you need. So that's another reason why tomorrow is going to be like a check-in for how your paper is coming. Because I think there's maybe 12 days until that paper is due, like regular days, not school days. So there are 3 options. Remember, I went over this on the 9th, but there are 3 options for the research paper. One of them is, oh, there, I can make a little more room. One of them is to look at the work of a literary movement. In that case, you would be searching to find out what scholars have had to say about the contributions of medieval literature. What did the writers who were writing during that time period contribute to the scope of what we know is British literature? Or maybe, the Renaissance was really interesting to you. So what about literature in the Renaissance is carried through, and how did it affect literature that we see today? So you would go and find scholars who have made comments about that, and you would compile at least 5 of their works into your paper as a report on how the medieval literature or Renaissance literature or Romantic literature helped to build British literature as a whole. Or maybe you want to look at the works of one author. Maybe you want to go back and you want to say, you know, Milton seems pretty interesting. Let me go, I don't have to read everything Milton wrote, but I want to hear what scholars have had to say about his influence on British literature as a whole. And I could hear, you know, 5 different people talk about what Milton meant to literature and the future of literature. And in that way, I could report on what those scholars have had to say. The third option is to look at a specific text. Maybe you want to go back to part 1 of Gulliver's Travels, and you want to see what scholars have had to say about lenses. You're not going to be applying lenses. You're just looking to see what do scholars say about the feminist lens or the Marxist lens or the formalism lens. So you need to do at least 2 on that one. So you might go back and say, oh, well, I can see somebody doing a psychoanalysis reading of Beowulf. What has anybody ever done about that? And then see what they had to say in their research, their paper, and then you put that into your paper. Or maybe somebody wants to do a feminist reading of Paradise Lost, the part that we read. So you can then use the rest of this document, kind of outlines or refreshes your memory, because we did some work with lenses in the first semester, to kind of give you an overview of the different lenses that you can use for this paper. So the rest of the document only applies to option 3. Options 1 and 2, you don't need the rest of the document for that. That's just for option 3 here. So if you are writing about a specific piece and looking at what scholars have had to say through the different lenses, then you can use this as one of your sources. The English department at STC put this together, and you'll see that at the end of each entry, they've put in the bibliographical information here so that you can go and find it. Or you can cite this particular document. If you decide to cite this document, did they put it at the end? I wonder if I scrolled to see that at some point. No, I can give you the citation if you end up using this document. But maybe it'd be better to go back to the original sources that are listed on here. All right, so tomorrow I'm going to ask you, you know, which one of these 3 do you think you're going to do? You know, what movement, what author, what text? Maybe you haven't found any sources yet, and that's okay. But that would be something that I would start doing in the next few days if you don't want to, you know, spend all day the Monday before it's due working on this paper. And that's the week before exams too. So I think if you spread it out, you'll be better off overall. Are there any questions about the paper? I know I talked about this also on the 9th, so you can go back to that video, or it's pretty much what I told you in this video. Tomorrow, I'll get some individual check-ins from you on your formative, so I'll kind of know where each person is. I may end up emailing you if you know, your response made it seem like you wanted some feedback or something, then I'll email you. I've already heard from a few people, maybe 5 or 6 people have sent me their thesis statements. One person asked me to help them find some sources on their topic. So here and there, a few people have been working, but I just thought that I would give you a little bit of a timeline to help you meet that deadline so that your paper is as successful as possible. We really only have this week's discussion, next week's discussion, the paper, and the final. That's all that's left. And those are some pretty hefty grades, the paper and the final. So together, they're what, 40% of the overall grade. So it's important that you get it in, and it's important that it's in good order. So I'm here for you. I'm here to help you with it. I don't see anything in the chat. So I'm going to switch over and we can talk a little bit about Earnest. Last time we were looking at Act 2 of the importance of being earnest. And that's sort of the climax in some ways of the play, because it's the moment where Jack and Algernon kind of get in trouble because their love interests, Gwendolyn and Cecily, discover that they haven't exactly been honest about their identities, both claiming to be Earnest. Of course, Earnest is made up. Jack Worthing created Ernest so that he would have an alter ego when he's in town. Algernon Moncrief who's his friend, has his own alter ego when he's in the country, and that's Bunbury. But to complicate matters, Algernon decides to go out to the country to visit Jack and pretend to be his brother Ernest. And so all that kind of comes to, climax in Act 2 when we saw that Gwendolyn realizes that Ernest's name isn't really Ernest, that it's John. Jack is a nickname for John, by the way. And Gwendolyn realizes that that Gwendolyn realizes that Ernest is not really his name, and Cecily realizes that Algernon's name is not Ernest. Why do these ladies want to have the name Ernest? Because they think that being named Ernest means that you are earnest. And earnest, it means honest and straightforward and all of that stuff. So in Act 3, there are some surprises. There are some, identity surprises that come up. So do continue to make note on satire. Next week's discussion is about the satire that is in this play. So I've already given you some hints, I've talked about it a few different times. You can see in their arrangements to get married how quickly they make decisions and how capriciously they make choices about who to marry. They fall in love, in a matter of minutes. Even Cecily in Act 2 talks about how she's already engaged to Ernest, which is weird because Ernest doesn't really exist. Algernon just pretends to be Ernest. So Wilde is making fun of the way that the aristocracy handles their marriages and their love affairs and who they're with and so on and so forth. You should be tracking in your notes these concepts over here. I think those will, be crucial to your understanding of the play. The big one in Act 3 is identity, because not only does it get sorted out that Ernest is really Jack and Algernon is not really Ernest, but there are also some surprises about Jack's origins. So all of that comes out in Act 3, the final act of the play. Are there any questions about Act 3? I don't know if you've already read it or not. Anything with the play before we watch Act 3 together today? No? All right, well, if something comes up, you can put it in the chat. I'm going to switch over to the video. This is picking up at the beginning of Act 3, where this is Cecily, and she and Gwendolyn have just gone inside because they're upset that they've been deceived about the names of the men that they're in love with, and we'll proceed from there.